We'll now take a keynote address on the topic, How the Global South's Religious Growth Shapes Social Justice. Our speaker is founding executive director of the Sane Institute. Let's welcome Professor Dr. John Azuma.
Good morning. Permit me to stand on established protocol, which was so effectively established by the Deputy High Commissioner from Australia. We want to once again thank all of you for making this time to be here as we gather here as faith leaders to examine the role of faith leaders in this dangerous and menacing kind of threat to our societies, especially to the vulnerable ones. Religion and, let me see whether I can get this. Faith, religion and slavery have had a very complicated kind of history. And we know that because right here in Ghana, in our own country, if you cast your eyes to Cape Coast, to Elmina Castle,
Yes.
and I'm sure most of us here know the place that I'm talking about. The Elmina Castle is one place where you have the history of faith and slavery. Its complicated nature so manifest. This was a castle that was built in 1492. And when you walk in there, you see the dungeons of slavery. But what distresses me as a religious person when I walk into the castle is the fact that there is a chapel at the center of the castle. And while people were drugged, trafficked, manhandled in the dungeons, there was a church service and communion service going on in the chapel right there. Faith leaders and faith on many different ways have been complicit in using very oppressive religious texts. Thank you. We have been complicit in using religious texts to justify slavery, even though slavery itself was mainly driven by commercial and economic considerations. Religion was always co-opted to justify the practice. And these groups use both Islamic, Christian, whatever religious groups have used texts from their traditions to justify slavery. The good news, though, is that the same traditions have also been leveraged. There are positive and liberative texts within these traditions, and those have been leveraged also by abolitionists to campaign against slavery. And we know that this fight against slavery had a very huge impact back in the 17th, 18th centuries. But if you look at that kind of nexus between faith and slavery, religion and slavery, you see also that religion has been on the rise in the global south. Religion has grown very tremendously in the global south. And you will see from 1910, the growth of the Christian religion in the global south as compared to 2010. 2010 to 1910, you see the difference. Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, had barely 1.5% in 1910 of Christians. But by 2010, it had almost 24% of Christians. And it had shrunk in the global north. So religion has grown tremendously in the global south. And look, if you look at the Islamic faith, it's the same. The faith has grown tremendously in the global south. Islam is predominantly a global south, North Africa, Middle East, South Asia, and South Asia and South Asia kind of religion. And if you like, the former Soviet republics also. Islam is very much a global south religion also. So religion is very predominant and still wields a lot of influence in the global south. If you look at this map, it tells you where religion is deemed to be most important. Again, in the global south, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and in the Middle East. That is where people say religion is most important to them. Religion is diminishing in its importance and its relevance in the global north as compared to the global south. So what does this all mean for faith leaders in our responsibility to issues like modern slavery? If you look at modern slavery, and I picked this from one of our organizers here, Walk Free. If you look at modern slavery and where it is most prevalent in the darker shaded areas. Of course, if you look at the red shaded areas, that is where it is believed to be most prevalent, even though I'm sure the communist countries will resist that and dispute that very strongly. But if you look at the global south, again, religion is strongest, is growing fastest in the global south. At the same time, modern slavery is manifesting itself most strongly also in the global south. This connection, this correlation is something that should disturb us as religious leaders. So modern slavery is still present with us despite all the efforts that have been put in it by faith leaders and by different organizations. And so we want to say that modern slavery is something, as our director just said here, manifests itself in forced labor, in trafficking, and in different forms of exploitations that impacts mainly the vulnerable people. And as we can see even in this diagram, modern slavery is also very much manifest in Ghana. We saw the extreme version of modern slavery when ISIS showed up in Syria in 2014, thereabout, where it was flagrantly, the Yazidi community suffered a lot in the hands of this militant group, which abused religion, misused religion to subject people to slavery. And that is what is happening in many areas. We've already had examples here in our own country, and the types of child labor in Ghana, as we can see, is also very much present. And we need to be aware of these things. If you look at the agricultural sector, and the trafficking is still real. It's a very present danger and menace to Ghanaian society. And I'm speaking as someone, when I got this topic, it hit me because talking about child trafficking, my own nephew was trafficked in the first 6 months of this year. This boy disappeared from my home. He suddenly disappeared. And for 6 months, we didn't know where this boy was. Until we got a telephone call and he was stuck in La Côte d'Ivoire. What we call in Ghana, Keynote. And he was in desperate need of help. I did what I could to bring this boy back to Ghana, and he almost died. He was held in captivity for 6 months. So when we talk about survivors, it's not far away. It can happen to anybody. It can happen to any of us. Our kids, our children have mobile phones, and they get to them through these devices, and they lure them and they traffic them to dangerous situations. Human trafficking is not just a story. It is a reality that we need to be mindful of and be aware of. It happened to me, and so I can tell you it's real. It takes different forms in Ghana also. We know of this on the Lake Volta, the children who have been used there for fishing. And we know one of the issues that we have been fighting from our institution, for instance, it passed in 2023 by Ghana's parliament. And unfortunately, the bill was not signed into law. We are praying that the current government will take responsibility and do something about this kind of danger to our most vulnerable. But as we work on some of these issues, on witchcraft accusation, on child labor and human trafficking, and all the different forms of modern slavery in our country, we need to also remember that, as I said earlier, faith leaders invoked texts from their religious traditions to exploit the vulnerable. But they also invoke texts to bring about freedom and liberation. And I want to stand on some of these texts and to say that as religious leaders, we need to look into our traditions. There are positive texts there, there are liberative texts there that we can draw upon from whether it's the Quran or it's the Christian Bible or whatever traditions that we may have. Every religion will agree that we are there for the sake of the vulnerable. Governments will always want, in most cases, not all governments, but governments in most places will have to be pressured to give thought to the vulnerable. But if faith leaders, we claim to be the voices of the vulnerable in society, we must speak up. We must be those who must work together to bring about the freedom of these vulnerable people in our societies who are held in very desperate conditions against their will. And I have said that a lot of us here are doing a lot of good work in many of these areas. However, for me, dealing with an issue like modern slavery, child trafficking, forced encampment, and imprisonment, we need to move beyond some of the steps that we are taking now. A lot of us are engaged in relief aid to some of these centers. When you go to the north and you go to these so-called alleged witch camps, you find that a lot of religious groups come there to provide relief to these vulnerable women there. And that is great work. But for me, if you want to treat malaria, there are different steps to treat it. With the paracetamol, with the painkiller, with the pain relief medicine, but also you can also treat it with malaria kind of prescription that will deal with the issue in the individual. But to treat malaria in a more comprehensive way, we must find ways to deal with the mosquitoes. And so there are 3 different levels: paracetamol, the malaria treatment, and dealing with the environment. And so for me, if faith leaders want to be effective, we must come together and not just provide relief aid or deal with issues as firefighting approach and this kind of reactionary approaches, but we must deal with systemic change. Faith leaders must come together to change systems. We must fight like we tried the last number of years to bring about legislation to protect the vulnerable. And I'm hoping and praying that faith leaders in this room, we will work together, we will look at our traditions, we will draw strength from our traditions and inspiration from our traditions and work together to not just provide relief aid, to not just provide relief to individuals, but to provide systemic change in our society for the freedom and for the dignity of our vulnerable people in our Ghanaian society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Awesome stuff there from Professor Azuma. For me, what sticks in my mind is the 3-level approach: the paracetamol approach, the malaria medicine, and then dealing with the environment. And I guess you can use that framework to solve any problem whatsoever. Thank you once again for such a really powerful address.